Welcome back. Medical marijuana is once again on the ballot for Floridians. Amendment 2 narrowly failed 2 years ago when it got 58% support, just 2 points short of the 60% threshold needed to pass. It is back on the ballot this year, and local governments are taking notice. As you heard, moratoriums have been put into place in Sarasota and Venice, and we're likely to see more municipalities follow suit. So what kind of challenges could legalization present for Florida, and what could it do? Good could it do? And joining us for more on tonight's discussions are Kathy and Bob Jordan, longtime advocates for the legalization of medical marijuana, and Rod Thompson, president of the Sarasota Republican Club. And I know this is such a fundamentally emotional issue for everybody on both sides of this issue, but Rod, I wanted to give you a chance to start because you do not favor this.
No, I don't. I'm unconvinced on any of the science involved with medical marijuana, although clearly there are anecdotal situations such as this one where people do get help or appear to get help from it, and that's the case. However, calling it medical marijuana I have a big problem with, because there's not in any way that it's measured medically. It hasn't gone through the scientific rigors, it hasn't done the A/B testing, it hasn't done anything by which we have medical. No major medical associations are in favor of it. The Florida Medical Association is not in favor of it. None of these are in favor of it because there isn't anything really medicinal about it proven scientifically. What we have are a lot of anecdotes. So in that respect, I'm not for it in that case. In this particular amendment, I think it's a huge mistake, really. It's full of holes. It's actually worse than the one 4 years ago, or 2 years ago. It's actually worse in that it's wide open as far as who can dispense it, who can get it, and it's very much similar to California's, and that's a disaster.
And let me give Bob and Kathy a chance to jump in. Kathy, you know, Rod says it's anecdotal. He's not going to argue whether or not marijuana has helped you, but has it?
Yes, it has. But cannabis is also a neurobiotizant, an anti-inflammatory, and an antioxidant. The federal government has a patent on this.
Okay, and Bob, help us out there.
Well, she's saying that it's anti-inflammatory. The federal government has a patent on it right now, okay? And what the gentleman's saying is true, but there's a reason for that.
True in terms of what?
And the studies. But you can't study cannabis because it's a Schedule I drug. It has absolutely no, but according to the federal government, absolutely no medical value, a high percentage of addiction and abuse. And so therefore, being a Schedule I drug, you have to have a Schedule I license to study it. Now, NIDA, the Institution of Drug Policy in Washington, I may not be saying that correct, but anyhow, they let studies out, but you can only study it for the negative effects. We've met, like Dr. Dennis Petro, who was studying a lot of Vietnam veterans when they came home and wondering why they were using cannabis, and he started studying it, and he couldn't find anything wrong with it.
Rod, is that a fair point that we don't know medically whether or not this is generally effective because it can't be studied?
I think it's totally fair, as I understand it. That's the case. I think that the reason why it hasn't been, I think you'd have to take it off the Schedule I, which then has a whole number of other ramifications if you do that nobody's willing to do because there's just not the evidence so far. My suspicion is that there were strong medical professionals who were willing to say, no, there really is a lot of evidence here. We have to find a way of studying it. They would probably do that. But that hasn't been the case, so there hasn't been the push for it.
Bob, I want to let you respond to that.
Well, the reason for that is they can lose their license. Just mentioning cannabis to your doctor, he can lose his license. The doctor's not going to put himself at risk. The University of Southern Florida wanted to study cannabis, and they were already set up and all that. And they had the funding and everything. And what happened was all these doctors and all these lawyers and all got together and said, we're going to study this. And I said, no, you're not. And I got a high school education, and so they kind of didn't put too much weight to what I'm saying. But what it was is they would lose their federal funding if they brought cannabis on the campus. So the studies are hog-tied, so to speak.
All right, we are just getting started here, but when we return, we'll have a look at your weather forecast, so stay with us. Welcome back. If you are just joining us, we are discussing medical marijuana and the moratoriums being put into place by cities and counties across the state. Our guests tonight include Kathy and Bob Jordan, longtime advocates for the legalization of medical cannabis, and Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club. And Bob and Kathy, I first want to ask you, it's not legal in the state yet, but you grow it at your home because you were able to get a legal ruling, correct?
Yeah, I've got what's called medical necessity defense.
Kathy, what would you do if you did not have access to marijuana?
Without cannabis, I would die.
You know, without cannabis, you would die.
I need it first thing in the morning to clear my lungs.
He needs it first thing in the morning to clear her lungs. She gets up in the morning, has a hot cup of coffee, maybe 1 or 2 joints, marijuana cigarettes, and she coughs all the phlegm. ALS, you end up drowning in your own fluids or suffocating. It helps clears her lungs. She just had a lung test done about 6 months ago, and her lungs are operating at 98% after 30 years of smoking cannabis.
Probably, it's a hard argument to argue against.
That argument?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's impossible to argue against that.
But you're good.
That's why it's difficult here. So I would argue in the big picture of it, what I talked about before on the merits of the amendment itself, and on the value of medical marijuana. Apparently, none of the professional medical organizations think there is merit there, and they don't push for it, and they don't talk about it as medicine. And even this amendment does not require a doctor's prescription, just a recommendation.
Yeah, the growing number of states are putting it up to a vote. Let's move on from the point of view that what many communities around here are trying to do right now is, in anticipation of passage of this, they are putting into effect moratoriums so dispensaries would not be available. And we'll talk about the legal ramifications of that in a moment. But first, Bob, you've seen these stories. It's happening in Bradenton, Sarasota, Palmetto, it's Tampa, all over the place. Your thoughts about that?
Putting the cart in front of the horse, in my opinion, because first of all, they're doing something that might happen. Just wait till it passes, and then they're going to be able to legislate anyhow. But the thing with it, my thinking on this is, if it votes and the people want it as medicine, then why are legislatures acting like doctors and saying you can't have it? That is it medicine or not?
Now, Rod, you're not sure that it's even legal for these communities to be doing that.
I'm about positive it's not. If it passes on Tuesday, it's in the Constitution. The state Constitution is going to trump any municipal ordinances, any municipal zoning, state legislature. You can't do anything. It's one of the problems with putting it in the Constitution. I understand that's a nice end run around the legislature, but the problem then is that that is the highest law in the land of Florida. So then you can't do anything. Other elected bodies cannot do anything. So all these Sarasota and Bradenton and others that have done this will probably immediately or very soon be facing litigation from John Morgan probably and his firm, or any others out there, and they'll have a very strong case. So my recommendation to all these municipalities is start saving money right now for litigation for that if you really intend to defend it.
But it's a popular thing to be proposing. In fact, I moderated the debate of the Manatee County commissioners who are running, and several of them said, I am not going to allow this to come into my community. So, Bob, you're going to have this push.
Yeah, oh yeah, we understand
It's already
it.
in the community.
Yeah, that's one thing we had to say too, is like, I would debate, I think it was Stubbe, and anyhow, he said, we don't want marijuana shops, even though they show marijuana shops on every corner and all that stuff, and how the whole state's going to be flooded with marijuana. And I said, I don't even know exactly what county I'm in, but how much pot you want, and I'll go out and get it in a half hour and bring it back. They're already there. We're not that far apart. We're for regulation, safe, legal access to cannabis.
But let me ask you this, because I did a little digging around and I came up with a story from NBC News concerning the situation in Colorado, which was one of the first states to pass medical marijuana. And it said that in 2009, Denver police estimated that 17% of marijuana retail shops had been robbed or burglarized in the last year, which I would imagine a lot of law enforcement or concerned citizens would say, hey, listen, we don't want this coming into our neighborhoods for that reason.
Yeah, well, it's I don't have an answer for that one. That's a law enforcement problem. And the thing of it is that what they have now, you can't go to a bank it's federally against the law for these dispensaries to go to a bank, and they're dealing in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cash by weeks and months, you know, and that makes a soft target, and you're going to have problems.
Right,
with
and Rob, that
money.
brings up
Yeah.
a federal issue, since
Yeah.
it is still Schedule 1. In Colorado, in places like that, it has been a significant issue in terms of the companies that sell medical marijuana, how they do their financial business.
Right, and I have no idea how they handle that, because the Fed seems to be of two minds on this. There's the federal law bans it, Schedule 1, as Bob was saying, and yet they're letting Colorado do it. And they let California and Washington and others do it. Bob said he didn't know how they would handle that with dispensaries on every corner. Here's how you handled it. You don't vote. You vote no on Tuesday, because once it's in the Constitution, and it's similar to California's, and I've been out to LA, you do a search. There are more medical marijuana dispensaries in LA Basin, where my son and his wife live, than there are Starbucks. And those places look exactly like the pot shops you expect them to look like. They're not medical in any sense of the word.
But in terms of crime in and of itself, that NBC News story goes on to say that even at 19 or 17% of marijuana retail shops being burglarized or robbed, 20% of liquor stores and 34% of banks have the same kind of problem. So it's a matter of, you know.
So this just adds to that problem. I mean, if you look at it from a Florida point of view, with medical marijuana, if it acts in the same way as it does in California, and according to this proposed constitutional amendment, it will, then I think you're going to see a significant hit to Florida's family-friendly tourism industry. And further, you're going to have a gateway piece of legislation to full legalization, because that's what happened in Colorado
Well,
first.
I don't want to digress topics, but you know there was legislation in the past session in order that in terms of open carry in Florida and on college campuses. One might argue that kind of legislation would have more adverse impact in terms of tourism.
Well, you're right. That's a big digression, and I would disagree on that.
Okay. You know, Kathy, I believe there was something you wanted to say in terms of the shops.
And also, with the shops, it's up to the county commissioners to regulate this. I have been in states, when I was in Oregon, all you're allowed to do is put a green cloth in the window. That's all the advertisement you're allowed to do.
Okay.
So
You say in Oregon, you just put a green cloth, and then you have it shows you have a license, and you come in there. California, you got to remember, California was the first, okay, and they made a lot of mistakes. We don't want it to look like California, you know. We're for safe, legal access. And on the other hand, when you don't have safe, legal access, if they do this wrong, the black market's still going to be there. And what happens with black market, it happened to us when I had to go out and buy some for her. They sprayed the plant with Raid. It almost killed her. Now I got to go to the black market. I'd much rather be able to go to the dispensary and have something tested and know the percentages of cannabis in it and be able to pick it up safe and legally.
All right. We'll have to leave the conversation just there for a moment. We'll take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus some of your comments on the story making headlines today. Welcome back. Will Amendment 2 pass on Tuesday? And if it does, how will moratoriums across the state and the Suncoast impact access to the drug? Our guests join us for final thoughts. And Bob, let me start with you. I guess there are two questions. Number one, are you predicting that Amendment 2 will pass? Do you think it should pass? And what do you think about the moratoriums that many communities are planning?
Well, I disagree with the moratoriums. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people. I think it's going to be close. It's going to be a squeaker, because 60% is a hard number to get. And, you know, this is very, very important to a lot of people. And I'm trying to figure a way to get the politics out of it, and you can't, and that's why it's in the constitutional amendment.
You can get the politics out of it, but there's an interesting difference between, you know, now and when it was on the ballot 2 years ago. Many people accuse John Morgan of pushing it to help Charlie Crist when he was running for governor. Now you have a full turnout presidential election year. Rob, put your political hat on for a second. How does that impact
That
things?
helps it. I think that helps its odds, because turnout is going to be higher. And on presidential election years, turnout is usually higher among Democrats. and Democrats are a little bit more likely to vote for something like this. So I think in that sort of general sense it helps it. But I think that by and large, this amendment, even if you're in favor of medical marijuana, as we were talking before, ideally the place is the legislature. But if you're going to do it in the Constitution, then this amendment is not the way to do it, because it is so full of loopholes as far as how you can get it. All you need to do, there's a thing in there that's called, comparable, problems for it. And that can be anything from stress, anxiety, loneliness, whatever, and you can get it.
All right, we'll have to leave the conversation right there. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about a story that broke this morning. 3 schools in the city of Sarasota were put on lockdown today after a firearm was stolen from a vehicle. The lockdown was lifted and no students were injured, but it comes on the same week that 2 other Suncoast schools received threats. Here is what some of you are saying. Tammy Boyce writes, "What morons. People, keep it locked up or in your plain and simple. Car needs to be serviced. Leave it at home in your safe. Absolutely ridiculous." Patty Irvin writes, "Smart. Have a gun in an unlocked vehicle. Whoever the car belongs to needs to lock it next time. And if it's not registered, hope you never see it again." And Chet Nehart writes, "The car was probably locked when they dropped it off. The service department isn't in the habit of locking vehicles. Easy with the blame." Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Kathy and Bob Jordan are advocates for the medical use of cannabis, and Ron Thompson is president of the Sarasota Republican Club.